Welcome to Norse Talk, information of the gods. I am Red Bearded Viking. This is Red Dranger, and tonight we are going over a Practical Heathen's Guide to the Astra by Patricia Lafayllve. We are on chapter 6, which we'll go into here in a few minutes, guys. First of all, if you guys aren't following us on our Instagram and our Discord, the links are in our bios under those beacons pages, as well as the three support pages, our Venmo, Cash App, and PayPal to help keep this going, you guys. You guys have all been amazing so far helping out with this. We're also tonight in the Q&A section. We will be raffling off this final T-shirt. It's number 2 of 3 that will only be in this color for a limited time. So this will be a collector's item, you guys. So if you want in on getting that second of the third T-shirts, it's the last one we're giving away. We're keeping one for ourselves. Uh, Go ahead and drop it on the Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal for those raffle tickets. And we're going to do something special, you guys, for tonight. Since the raffle is tonight, the entries were 5 an entry. What we're going to do instead is we're going to drop it down to 3 an entry. And for every 5 that you put in, we'll give you 2 entries. And I'm going to hand it over to Red.
Yeah, welcome you guys. We're excited tonight. Tonight we're going to be working in chapter 6, creation and cosmology. Sorry, tongue-tied. I want to remind you guys that we do have the Discord open. I am currently under books in the Q&A section on the Discord, so if something comes up during the live and you have a question, please drop it in there. You guys try to remember that me and Redbeard, while we're reading, can't really see the comments because we got our phones pushed back kind of far for this part. That being said, creation and cosmology. This is a really, really cool chapter. Every faith has a creation story. Like in everything else heathen related, this one is conflicted, and there are various different thought processes on different parts of it. Some are more universally believed than others, but you are going to see parts tonight that might differ from what you know or what you've heard. So keep an open mind and understand again that this is not one right book, this is one opinion.
Right. There are many books out there, you guys. We're going to be getting into more books in the future. Once again, the next book we're getting into, you guys, is going to be the Study Hoggle. We will be getting a link up for that by the 1st of December is the plan. And we get our books to get started on it and start setting up for that one as well while we're finishing up with this one, you guys. So creation and cosmology. With heathenry is relatively new, as we all know, you guys. And its beginning occurred when Asatru was formally recognized by Iceland in the 1970s. Dranger was just talking about how Iceland was one of the last cultures to subside to Christianity. It's important to remember and not underestimate such events as the Industrial Revolution and its impact on the modern society. And equally impossible to disregard is the scientific method and the spirit of inquiry that walks hand in hand with it. We cannot go backwards, and we cannot erase our own past. So we've got to look into our past and recognize our past as it was brought down through the different ages, being passed along before it was finally documented. So let's get into the discussion of the creations of myths read here in paragraph 2.
Yeah, I just want to say a quick thing about that first sentence here, just to clarify with some of the people in the audience. When they say heathenry is new, I want you guys to make sure that you understand that they're talking about the modern recurrence of heathenry. Heathenry is starting to make a rise, and that rise started officially in the 70s when they labeled it an official religion. We know that heathenry outdates a lot of other faiths. We're not trying to say that that in itself is new. Just wanted to make sure we put that out there. Okay, this chapter we're going to be talking about creation myths. And like we said, every major faith has their adaptation of creation and end times myths. And Norse paganism is no different. Most of the information comes from both the prose and poetic Edda. And they again make sure to stress that in the Norse world, there are 9 worlds and or realms. People often mix the terms up. I don't have a specific favorite. I tend to say realms more than I say worlds, but that's just me.
So what are those 9 worlds or realms called?
I'm pretty sure you said that you were going to read those tonight, my friend.
So the 9 worlds or worlds or realms, you guys, I am going to butcher. And so we got Muspelin, Nilfheim, Asgard, Midgard, Vanaheim, Lugasolfum. We're gonna skip that one. We're gonna skip that one and Helm.
Okay. I'll have a go at it too, okay? Muspelheim, Nilfheim, Asgard, Midgard, Vandenheim, Logisheim, the S one gets me, Jotunheim, and Helheim.
Thank you, Rick. So here we're going to go into the world cosmos of the North, you guys. And in this, it says, in the beginning, there was nothingness and chaos. Muspelheim, a world of fire, heat, and ash, exists in the south, and Niflheim, the realm of ice, frost, and glaciers, existed to the north. So right there, we get our first 2 aspects and our first 2 directions, north and south, which are very important. Have always been very important aspects of
Yeah, it's
between. Go ahead.
sorry. It's the fact that again they bring in the north and the south is just it's a really cool and grounded kind of thought belief. Again, that just the absolute basis of the creationism itself. Again, north and south. It just I'll talk more on that later, but it's an interesting theory if you look at heathenry as a whole. I'll explain that later. Sorry.
And then it goes into explaining between the gap between the two yawned the chasm known as the Geno Gap, which is translated. Jin means gap, but it also means vast or wide, and most directly as of a chaotic or formless void, which I find interesting. It's like the way that they described the area in between fire and ice was just a vast void of nothingness that was pretty much never ending.
Yeah. So the next part of it, it seems rational to assume then that the Union Gap was more a void than a mere gap or chasm. That it has no form also speaks to how there were things at the beginnings of the mythic Norse world. Some heathens have speculated that the Union Gap was also considered a realm of potential, which is an interesting thought process to see fire and ice and balance. And again, that's a completely different thought process, but that sparked in my head when I read that part. Out of the formless, the chaos arise worlds that are in order, including our own Midgard. When the magma of Muspelheim and the icy waters of Niflheim churning well, I don't know how to say that word, met with a great hissing noise, the rime formed. A cow named Adhunla licked at the Rhine until her licking freed the first being, the creature Ymir. And we've gone over Ymir a few times in a few of the other chapters. He was one of the first giants.
Yes. No one knows where Alum and Ymir come from. They simply did not exist, and then they just did. The same can be said of for the tree, because it's not specifically formed in the creation of the myth. It's just simply present, which I find interesting because it's like they talk about where the first creature came from, but there's no historical evidence where these things came from.
Yeah, and the next sentence leads into, and again, this has not been proven, and a lot of this information is long expired and gone to us. There is some theory that the void, the first creations, and Yggdrasil itself predate Norse beliefs and go more back into Proto-Indo-European, Sana, that kind of stuff.
Right, because that's where it goes into where you have the fire on one side and the ice on the other, and the great tree rising
Yeah.
up through the yawning void. Its roots
Yeah.
extending below the metaphysical lowest point, and its branches up through the metaphysical uppermost level. And interpretation by the author was that the access historically cross cultures seemed to be a center pole on which everything else revolves.
Yeah.
So basically, it's the center of where everything else revolves. And once again, that's based on the author's own opinion of her interpretation. When Ymir sleeps, beings emerge from his armpits, his knees, and his feet. These are referred to as the ice giants, but may also have been fire giants. We're not sure. Both were considered Heathens, another word for giant, but Thursar also. The Thursar, the giants dedicated to chaos and destruction, and are not friends at all with mankind, which we talked about in the prior chapter. We went into quite a bit of detail with the whole thing between the giants and the others.
Yeah. So that leads us. The giants were the rulers. The giants rule the void, the Gundingal. For some time, this is where the Attends Bor and Bestla give birth to Odin, Vili, and V. Also, Odin, Honir, and Lodur, depending on one's mythological material, actions are set into motion. The three gods murder Ymir and use his body to create Midgard, or Middle Yard. His skull is the vault of the sky and is held up by dwarves. Those dwarves we spoke about a little bit in the last chapter. Asatru East, Sundry South, Vistri West, and Nordri North. Again, guys, notice the similarities again, that everything is thrown back into the compass. Everything is given direction. It's all part of the living world.
Right, so it's like it always comes back to those four different directions, especially the north and south. And then it goes on to say his bones make the mountains and the stones are his teeth. His eyebrows form a boundary around Midgard, and his blood drowns almost all the giant kin. Odin, Vil, and Vig, his parents, the giants, Bor and Vestal, escape in a boat, and the giants go to the land of the giants to live their lives from that point on. At this point, Odin and his brothers create the sun and the moon, the worlds and everything in them. And it is only after this that they come across the driftwood pieces fated to become the first humans.
And the chapter doesn't go into much more detail about the driftwood. That is something that is covered a little bit later on in the book, so we will be getting to that. So I'm not going to touch on that too much because this chapter doesn't deal with that part of the story. Heathens agree for the most part that there are 9 worlds in heathen cosmology. The myths also refer to the 9 worlds. 9 is a sacred number. One could very well argue that there are 9 worlds because, as it's in sense, 9 is the sacred number, and that's how many the skalds used. That said, 9 is mythologically significant across cultures. You will find that wherever the number is important to a given culture, it will repeat and repeat therein. So 9 is something that we have already seen in pretty much all of the chapters so far, from talking about the realms to talking about Heimdall to talking about there's another part that I just slipped my memory all of a sudden, but it is a very significant number to the Norse community.
Right, because Norse worldwide view, 9 is one of the sacred numbers, as are 12, 3, and 4. Yeah. But on the other hand, 9 could very well be something similar to many. How many worlds are there? It goes in to discuss a story with this where the 6-year-old asks her grandfather about the how many is many, and he's like many, and how many is many lots. How many are
Yeah.
lots? 9. And like it goes into a very broad perspective of how that number kind of came up. But once again,
Yeah.
it's just another one of the theories. Because there's nothing that was um, passed down to support that theory.
Yeah.
Poets recited the songs, stories, myths, and sagas well before they were even written down, which we were talking about earlier, you guys. So you got to remember that when a poet is reciting, he or she will change things around in order to conform to rhyme, the meter, rhyme, illustration, and artistic merit, so that the stories and factual are able to be proven accurately, not necessarily. So like some of the stuff could have got changed around to make it rhyme. Um, Aspects of the story may be a little bit reversed or maybe been altered.
Yeah. Tillamook, thank you for it. Was the 9 virtues was the other 9 that I was thinking about, so I thank you for that. This part of the book is really, really important, guys. You guys have to remember that the Norse culture wasn't one for the written word. They didn't keep written text. Everything was done via stories, via performers, via people that would travel amongst the communities and pass on information. And there's a lot of conflict in the community in general when it comes to that, because there are people that have a hard, fast belief that something is a specific way, where another group of heathens might see it as completely different, and that's okay. It all boils down to, and we were talking about this earlier. If you guys remember ever playing the telephone game, so if you guys have ever played the telephone game, it's when you and however many other people sit in a line, something is whispered into the ear of the first person, and then it's passed on. And by the time it gets to the last person, who then repeats that phrase out loud, it's often very, very different. The message still may be the same, but the way it's presented is very, very different. So it's an important thing to remember when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Right, and when the composers of the lays, poems, and songs that made up the Poetic Edda were written things down, they were first of all writing down myths that were already in place and had been part of the oral tradition for several hundred years. So that's several hundred years of the telephone. You know, if
Yeah,
you can imagine sitting in a circle and seeing the outcome with just like 20 people or even 10 people, think of 700 years
yeah.
of a story being passed down.
Well, and how those stories would have to change based on the region too. If a story of how sacred a certain tree was came into a community that didn't have those trees, it would often be changed. It would often been altered, like even if it was merely by accident, just by them saying the name and it being interpreted as meaning something else. It's just how it happens sometimes.
Right, definitely. You know, and that's where they talk about how it has ways of shifting over time. They admit the stories possibly could have shifted. You know, maybe people were more on track, but you never know. Um,
Yeah.
and then it goes into the track cores of the myths across time and culture. The truth is that things change. There might have been 3 worlds originally, in a mystic sense. Before the gods existed, there was Niflheim to the north and Lusum to the south, and a great yawning gap full of potential between them. And many have been an infinite number of worlds, and we only remember the names of 9. So there could be more, there could be less. You know, it's all speculation, and it's all what you believe. And what you believe in is what matters to you. So, like we've talked about before, you know, we're gonna get different stuff from different books. You guys, make sure that you're looking into the stuff that interests you, the stuff that piques your knowledge. Find other ways to get more knowledge about that. Definitely. It's also
So
safe
this
to
leads.
assume. Oh,
Oh,
go ahead.
yeah.
Sorry,
This
Left.
leads into probably again one of the most important parts of this chapter in my mind. is the author goes into great detail at looking again at the geology of where the Norse people lived, where they were on the actual planet, and when those people first started traveling, when they would go north, it would get colder. When they would go south towards the equator, it would get warmer. So it leads back to that initial part of the creationism where it again reverts back to nature, it reverts back to the living world. And I'm probably going to say that a lot tonight, but I think it's a very, very important part of Norse paganism that can be skipped over a little bit enough, or a little bit too much, is how connected we actually are to the realms, to Yggdrasil, to the living world itself.
Well, and then also keep in mind, you guys, when we talk about Iceland a lot, and it talks here about Iceland in particular is a land of ice and fire to this day, formed of active volcanoes, carved by glaciers. Its terrain is beautiful and deadly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so like that goes back to that whole fire and ice being combined portion.
Yeah.
That just furthers our history. And then it talks about Surt, who lives in Muspelheim. Uh, he will come forth from there with his flaming sword during Ragnarok, kill Frey, and set fire to the 9 worlds around us. And they are most likely the DNAs of them as well, the fire giants.
Yeah. So next it leads us into talking about Midgard. Midgard is where we are. It literally means middle yard. It's the space. So when they created the realm, I mean, we've already talked about the pre-existing two, the north and the south. The rest were kind of included in Midgard. Middle yard was the realm that sat in the center. It's not considered. So the Gunning Gap itself, the space, was not considered one of the worlds. It exists or existed when the fire sparks of Muspelheim and the icy winds and waters of Niflheim, they formed a rime. From the rime came the primal beings, Ymir and Midgard. Midgard was not Midgard until after Odin, Vili, and V killed Ymir because the creator our world from this bones and teeth, eyebrows, skull, among other parts. So the gap gave birth to the first beings. Right. Those beings led to the birth of Odin and his brothers. Odin and his brothers then struck down Ymir and used him to create Midgard. So
now we're to the portion where we talk about how we live in Midgard.
Yes.
This planet, the one we're walking on, is Midgard. All of us, humans, animals, reptiles, birds, rocks, trees, are all the Vitir. It seems a bit repetitive to define Midgard, since we are so intimately familiar with it because we live on it, but still, it's the creation of the gods who were placed at the center. We are a planet rotating around a sun and a galaxy, part of a greater universe. In mythological terms, however, we can still say we are the center of everything. Midgard itself can be considered both mundane and sacred at the same time. There are locations in Midgard, such as groves, wells, springs, and so forth, that are recorded as holy, or which are, our senses tell us, more sacred than other lands, or more sacred than Mundane. And we can trace this in the archaeological records as well, where they show the different where the different sacrifices occurred by the archaeological aspect of the digs.
Yeah. So, as they talked about Ymir being one of the first creatures, they talked about Odin being birthed of giants. So when we were talking before about Odin's origins, it briefly touched on that he was ancestrally from the giants as well, which is why he was not terribly hostile with the ones that were not hostile towards humans. That being said, when they created Midgard, the giants had to go somewhere. Midgard wasn't for them, it was said that they were washed away in the flood, and that's when they start talking about Jotunheim and other places like this, other worlds or realms. And there's not a whole lot that's written down about a lot of them. A lot of them exist because, well, the author says it really nicely, they exist because they must. The giants had to have a place to go. There had to be something else.
Yeah, and it says that the place where the giants lived is outside of Midgard.
Yeah.
That's where, and Thor and other gods have traveled to it from time to time. Thor mostly to destroy what giants he finds there, um, but it is not cited as being any one particular direction over the other. So, like, it never tells what direction
Yeah.
they went and where the land of the giants is, which I find interesting. Is like it never, because it talks about the gods that traveled there. So why doesn't it ever give us a direction?
Yeah. Well, and there was a brief touch on it in the other chapter when they were talking about the Attends and where they lived. And the brief descriptions broken down to their most basic points were the giants lived where men did not, where men could not. They were on the other side of the big mountains, kind of thing, where you dare not go.
Right. And that, and then that kind of leads us down into Asgard, um, and it is the home of, as we know, gods and goddesses. It's described as above Midgard, reachable by traveling the Rainbow Bridge named the Bifrost. The bridge itself, like all worlds, is guarded by the god Heimdall, whose senses are so accurate he can see the wool growing on sheep. Like, that's just crazy
Yeah.
to think his senses are that keen in that, like, as he stands on that Grimfrost at the entrance, he
Yeah.
can see everything from where he is
Heimdall is such an interesting, like, you guys, most of you guys that have been in here with us for a little bit know I have a few theories regarding Heimdall, just because of the descriptors of him, again, with his abilities and his connection to the fates, that he might be as different from some of the other gods than Odin and his brothers were from the giants, like, if that makes any sense to you. The book goes on to kind of describe the Aesir and the Vanir and the hostage trading. We have gone over that several times. Um, Again, if you're a little curious to that, this part does talk about it. Previous episodes of Norse Talk do talk about it in greater detail. I don't think we're going to be gained from anything.
there. Right. We'll just go into a little bit of it right here, you guys, that they do mention, but we're not going to go into because we haven't talked about it. We won't go into as much detail. Um, as we all know, when they were at war with one another, they decided to end the war by combining their forces because they realized that the giants were a bigger issue, so that they could fight the giants. In the Iron Age and Viking Age, many disputes were settled by the exchange of hostages at the same time, or and the same thing happening at the end of this mystic war. So that's one thing that um, the humans took from the gods was the exchange of the hostages to settle the differences instead of
Yeah.
continuing to feud with each other.
Which again is a very different classical description than how we tend to view hostages in today's day and age. Today's day and age, when you hear the term hostage, you think of people taking something or someone to gain something. Where when they referred to as here, that the hostage change was permanent. Those certain gods went to the Aesir, those other gods went to the Vanir, and that is where they lived to ensure that the peace stayed instead of being used to gain something. Which again is
Right,
a
and then
really
this
cool
part's pretty interesting too,
theory.
you guys, where it talks about Najor and Frey were the two hostages the Vanir exchanged, and
Yeah.
Frey and Najor leave Valheim to live in Asgard. Um, Frey is not only in Asgard, but is the lord of the Elven. Freyja, Nord's daughter, and Frey's sister, also come and live at Asgard, and but she was never listed as part of the hostage exchange. which I find interesting that they left her out of it, even though they were exchanged. And they are the only three Vanir who live in Asgard. So there are no other Vanir that live in Asgard besides those three. So Frey's wife is both an Enten bride and a Van by marriage, and lives in Asgard with Frey. And Freya is said to have a daughter, Honus, and one images that she too may reside in Asgard. Imagines that she may too reside in Asgard. So that would be put four now that she has a daughter in Asgard. And there's just been so much interesting information in this part of the chapter. That's why we want to split it up into two, you guys, because we did want to make sure we touched on all that. Even though some of it has been mentioned before, but the actual creation part is really important to knowing our past heritage and our past lineage and where it comes from, and how things came about, which I really like the way that she broke down the story in this part of the
And
chapter.
the next part of the chapter leads into some of the great halls and stuff, and that is going to require a decent amount of attention to be paid as well. So this is where we are going to stop tonight for this portion of the chapter. We are going to pick up on page 93. So you guys do have time to catch back up on your reading, because I did notice there was a few comments, and everybody else has also had very busy weeks. So you guys have some extra time.
So that is where we're going to end with chapter 6 tonight, you guys, before we hit the Q&A section. Once again, you guys, don't forget, if you're not following us on Instagram and you're not following us on the Discord, links are in our bios under the Beacons page. Also, you guys, hit those 3 support pages on our bios as well to help Norse Talk keep going. We are going to be going into the Q&A section here real quick, you guys. Remember, when we hit that Q&A section tonight, we're going to be doing the raffle for the t-shirt. We're going to give people some time. We'll probably give it 30 minutes before we do the raffle after we hit that area. Yeah. So if you guys want a chance to win that limited edition shirt, we did say at the beginning tonight that if you put any entries in tonight, it'll be $3 for 1 entry and 2 entries for $5 for every 5. So instead of 5 for an entry, we broke it down to run a little special for everybody tonight that's here that wants to get in on that before we do the raffle. Other than that, I think we are ready to jaunt over into our Q&A section. You got anything else before we hop off of here, Red, and I jump into your box?
I don't believe so.
All right, guys. With that being said, remember, you guys, this is a we thing. It's not a me thing. It's not a him thing. We can't do it without each and every one of you guys. So you guys keep being amazing, stay creating, and as always, be awesome, and we'll see you on Wednesday.